Hello and welcome. My name is Waldo and the goal for this video is to get this truck in the shop and do some body work so it'll be ready for primer, sealer, and paint. We're doing a Cummins swap. This is it, my 1995 C3500HD. We're swapping a 24-valve Cummins into it, along with a 5-speed Eaton Fuller transmission out of a Freightliner. The goal is to have a capable and comfortable truck for towing and hauling future projects. I managed to get the belt-driven fan to work with the Dodge radiator by fabric cobbling a custom fan shroud out of aluminum. Let's get this thing welded up. What do you want? It's a cheap stud welder from Harbor Freight. Because I plan on painting the engine bay, I first need to get this engine and transmission out. So let's get to work. Yeah, we're not quite gonna fit in because the mirrors on this are too big, so time to fold them in. Well, here we have it. The truck is in the shop. Now we have a nice dry place to do some body work, some painting. Unfortunately, I am dealing with a dirt floor, but I'll just throw some plywood down and work on that. Yeah, so check out this new air compressor I just got at Tractor Supply. It's an Ingersoll Rand with an 80-gallon tank, and it supplies 15.5 CFM of air at 90 PSI. So I shouldn't have to worry about running out of air for things like painting, light sandblasting, and running other air tools. It runs on 230 volts single phase. It also has a 2-stage pump, which helps to reduce the amount of moisture in the air that comes out of it, which is really important when it comes to, well, almost anything you use air tools for, like painting, and also when you run air tools, like you really don't want moisture to end up in the tool because that can cause things to rust and whatnot. So this air compressor is going to be great for my use. Now, the only problem is that I didn't really think about how I was going to unload this from the truck. So at Tractor Supply, they loaded it with a forklift, obviously, and it weighs almost 500 pounds, so it's a bit heavy to lift, even with two strong men. Also, the height of the top of it is over 10 feet high, sitting on the truck here, so there's no way that the boom pole on my tractor is going to be able to get it off, and my loader over there is currently out of service because that has some hydraulic issues. So I'm going to have to figure this out. I think I might disassemble it, remove the pump and the motor, and then it'll be lighter and less tall, and then we'll see what happens. Maybe two big, strong men can move it disassembled.
Eventually.
I ended up getting the compressor on this slab by disassembling it and tipping it on its side, so my tractor could lift it with the boom pole. All things considered, it went fairly well. I have the cab of the truck pretty much all disassembled. I removed the fenders, the doors, the windshield, and the roof marker lights. I've also removed the dashboard and pretty much the rest of the interior as well. With this, I should have good access to the various body panels that need work. Last year, I started doing a bunch of body work, but didn't finish. On the driver's side, I replaced the floor pan, the rocker panel, and the rear cab corner. On the passenger side, I just replaced the cab corner and the rocker panel. The rust on the floor pan is just surface rust from water getting into the cab, so I'll be able to sand that down to bare metal for a paintable surface. As for what needs to get done, there's quite a bit of rust at the seam of the driver's side floor pan and the firewall. The transmission tunnel has a bit of rust, and I also want to cut a larger hole for easier installation of the shifter. The lower part of the doors have some rust that needs to be fixed. The driver's side fender has some significant rust. Because it's an easy panel to replace, I went ahead and bought a whole new fender. The passenger side fender is actually in decent shape. There are a couple holes in the roof, which I think are the source of water leaking into the cab. I'll patch these up since these were probably for wiring a rooftop-mounted strobe light, and I don't have a need for one of those. There's a large dent on the rear cab pillar. Lastly, the roof also has some large dents. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out this rusty part of the floor pan. If you look right here, you can actually see the light of day coming through there because that's fully rusted out. So I'm just going to cut this bit out and weld a new piece in there. I guess I'll probably get that as well. Alright, and with all this rust cut out, I actually just want to check the measurements with these calipers just so I know how thick this sheet metal is, because I don't want to use sheet metal that's any thinner than this. If anything, I want to use the same size or a little thicker, if that's all I have on hand. Looks like it's about .060 in thickness. Alright, so I got this piece cut up and installed and fit in pretty well. I had a bit of grinding to get it down to the right size. It fits in pretty tightly. So I just got to weld this in. There is a little gap over here that I haven't filled yet, but it starts to become kind of a complex shape because the firewall bends up a little bit more over here. So we'll take one bite at a time, and then next I'll cut out a piece for this. All right, so when you're welding in a new body panel like this, typically what you do is you do very short little welds, like basically tack welds, spread out along the whole piece until you have the whole thing welded. And what that does is, number one, it prevents you from burning through because it is very thin metal and it's a butt joint. But also number two, it helps to prevent distortions from too much heat getting into it, which is especially important if you're working on exterior panels that are going to be visible and you want them to look good. This is just a floor pan, so I'm actually not worried about distortions too much. So I might be able to be a little bit more aggressive with this, but still, I do have to worry about burning through. This piece that I cut out fits so tightly that I don't even need to use like any clamps or magnets or anything like that to get it to line up properly. It just kind of fits in. Pretty cool.
Much later.
Well, here we are. With quite a bit of patience and determination, I have it all welded in. If you ever wondered why bodywork is so expensive, it's because number one, it's very time consuming, and number two, it also takes a fair amount of skill to do it well. I don't claim to have a lot of that skill. This is actually the first vehicle I've ever done any bodywork on, so I've kind of learned as I was doing the floor pan and the rocker panels and the cab corners. Next, I'm going to work on plugging up these holes in the roof. Now, presumably they were used for wiring to have a strobe light on the roof here, because this used to be a bucket truck for the telephone company. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this washer and I'm going to weld it in there and use this to fill the gap. And then I will still have that sized hole to fill with, but I can manage that with the welder and, you know, without any extra material. Well, I got the holes welded up. They're not pretty, but it's the first step of many. So here on the back of the cab, I have these 3 holes in the sheet metal that I want to fill. And this is where a fire extinguisher was mounted, or rather the bracket for the fire extinguisher. They just had 3 bolts going through the cab, but it was kind of ugly and I don't want it to be like that. So I have a nifty little tool to help with this. So welding sheet metal can be tricky because it's so thin, it's very easy to burn through and you make a big mess. So I have this right here, which is a copper welding spoon. So all I did was I took a piece of pipe, it's either, I don't know, 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch copper pipe. I hammered it flat, and then I screwed it to a wooden handle here. And what you can do is you can actually take it and you stick it to the back of your sheet metal. I'll stick it on the other side. But, and what it does is you can just weld it up, and this will sink some of the heat away from the metal, which keeps it from blowing out. Let's take a look at these doors. So, my original plan was to replace the lower part of this exterior door skin because there's rust coming from the inside of the door through to the outside. And in any situations like that, you know, you have to remove all the rusty bits, you have to cut the metal out and weld new panels in. And you can pretty cheaply get replacement panels for this, for the lower part of the door, that is. In addition, on the passenger door, which this one is, there was obviously an impact. Something impacted the mirror, which pushed the door in a bit up here. Also, it kind of looks like the rivet nut that the mirror was bolted onto was ripped out here, and possibly over here. On this side there are 2 holes, so there's got to be some repair over here. Quite possibly cutting this out, welding new panels in, and drilling new holes so I can attach new rivet nuts. However, now that I've started to disassemble this door, I can actually see inside, and I can tell that this lower part of the door skin here has been replaced once before. It's also obvious looking at the paint itself that this truck has been repainted because whoever did it did not do a good job. There are obvious paint drips on the surface that they just didn't do anything with. Also, looking inside, I can see that there's actually a lot of rust in addition to on this panel. There's actually a lot of rust on the inside panel. And that's a really big problem because all of that has to be cut out and replaced. And to my knowledge, you can't get the inside door panels, or you can't get inside replacement panels for these doors. So I went ahead and I bit the bullet and I just ordered 2 brand new doors. It ended up being about $500 for both doors, including freight shipping. So those will come in, and I guess it'll just be really nice to have new doors, and it makes my life a lot easier, even though it is a little expensive. When the new doors do come in, I will have to drill new holes so that I can install rivet nuts, so that I can mount these mirrors onto the new doors. So if you've never seen one of these before, this is a rivet nut. It's got 8mm threads on the inside in this case, and the exterior is 11mm. And what you do is you drill an 11mm hole in your sheet metal, you stick this inside, you use an installation tool which takes it and it sort of pulls the threads out and causes a ridge here, which kind of like a rivet, it locks it into the sheet metal, and then you can go ahead and thread a bolt or something into it like you normally would a nut. And it's a pretty cool way of attaching to sheet metal. Alright, so at this point I've finished welding in new body panels, so next I'm going to start by tackling dent repair. So this right here is a dent that, obviously there was an impact here and it chipped some paint and caused a bit of a dent here. So I'm going to try to pull this out. And to do that, I'm going to use this, which is a stud welder that I got at a place none other than Hazard Fraught. Now this works by welding these little studs onto the metal, and then you can use a slide hammer which grips onto the stud and that pulls the dent out. Simple as that. You may need multiple studs welded on to pull out in multiple places, but I don't know, so we're going to see what happens. So I guess the first step is to grind this down, get all the paint and primer off, get it down to bare metal so that the stud welder can weld a stud on. Alright, so I have a stud inserted into the tip here. They say to stick this in so that the tip is sort of recessed in. The ground comes from this, so that needs to be up against the metal itself. We'll stick it right in the middle. And then I need to hold down this button back here for about half a second. It's not just like pull the trigger and it automatically times it. I have to get the timing myself. What do you want? It's a cheap stud welder from Harbor Freight. Wow. It looks like it worked really well, actually. If we zoom in a little closer, you can see the stud welded on. I don't know, is it hot? No, not really. Seems like it's on there pretty securely. And then next I just insert the slide hammer on this. It's got a little thing here which I think should grab onto it. I'll do it this way maybe. Yep. And then... Oh. I don't want to go too far. That already popped it out a decent amount. Oh, nope, a little more. Yeah, that's definitely better. We'll try another one up here. Get this part to come out a little bit more. They say you're supposed to wait 8 minutes in between welding on individual studs. That's the duty cycle of it. Yeah, right. Who's going to wait that long? There we go. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So I think all I have to do now is just cut these things off. There'll be very minimal Bondo in there just to smooth it out.
A little while later.
I went ahead and pulled the rest of the dents out. Overall, I'm surprised at how well the cheap Harbor Freight stud welder worked. And with all the dents pulled out, the next step is to grind down all the welds that I made. So I guess I'll start with these two holes that I filled up. We'll grind these down so they're flat-ish, and then I'll be adding some seam sealer, some primer, and Bondo to flatten these out, smooth out the surfaces so that I can put paint over them. Alright, I am getting ready to start applying this epoxy primer just to the areas where I'm going to be putting the Bondo filler. Now I'm not going to be spraying the primer on the rest of the vehicle yet because this primer gives you a 4-day window before it fully cures to apply the next coat. Otherwise you have to sand it, and I assume you probably don't get the optimum bond, so I'm just going to be doing the Bondo areas for now. So I'm using a Summit Racing primer along with the primer catalyst. It's a 1-to-1 mix, and yeah, so we got a cup to mix it in. I'm going to be spraying it with the Anest Iwata air gun here, and it actually has a 1.3 millimeter tip, which is not exactly ideal for primer, but I think I can get away with it. And then don't forget to have some xylene on hand to clean this stuff up, because regular cleaners like acetone and mineral spirits will not work for epoxy. You need to have something like xylene. Alright, so I got this thing all stirred up. So this is where this gets messy, because I only need a little bit. So I gotta pour out of this big gallon jug into this little container and get the right amount. I think I'm just gonna do 100 milliliters total, so I'll do 50 milliliters of each, and hopefully that'll be enough. Okay, well, that's gonna have to do. Now that it's evened out, it's actually, that was about 100 milliliters. And as for the catalyst, this is actually much thinner of a liquid, so this should be a lot easier to pour. That is a lot of paint. All right. Yeah, so I have to say, it caught me by surprise at how fast the primer came out. So I turned the pressure down and I tried a few other spots, and I also moved the gun a lot faster, shorter bursts, so it actually worked better over there. This is not a big deal. Yes, it dripped here, but I'll be able to sand that down and it'll be fine.
The next day.
Alright, so this Bondo filler has been allowed to cure overnight. So up next I'm going to sand this smooth, and I'm going to start by using 80 grit sandpaper, and I'm going to finish off with 180 grit sandpaper. For the areas that are easy to get to, like this, I'm going to use the orbital sander. This is going to make my life really easy because it just does a great job of sanding flat-ish surfaces. For the areas that are hard to get to, I'll have to use a sanding sponge like this. I've got the Bondo sanded down and it looks pretty decent. It's not perfect, but at some point you need to say this is a work truck, and while I want it to look good, I'm not going to get stressed out trying to make it perfect. With these panels filled and sanded, I have just a few odds and ends to finish up before painting the truck. The paint job will be a professional quality paint job. Or at least I'll be using professional quality materials. I'll be using an epoxy primer, followed by a high build urethane primer, followed by a primer sealer, followed by a urethane base coat, that's the color, finished off with a clear coat for a nice glossy protective finish. That's 5 different layers. Each one of those will probably have 2 to 3 coats as well. I'm still waiting for the new doors to come in, so I have no idea when I'm going to be able to start painting, but don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you'd like to see how the paint job turns out. If you have any questions or comments, let me know down below. Thank you for watching.